Family called me hopeless at my birthday. Then Harvard offered me a scholarship 3 hours later while I was still crying in my car outside my parents' house after my own mother told the guests I was the one we worry about during her toast. My younger sister had just been praised for 10 minutes straight for getting into community college, while I sat there with my 4.0 GPA being treated like a charity case. When the acceptance portal updated on my phone, showing a full ride to Harvard Law, I didn't rush back inside to share the news. Instead, I sat there watching my family through the dining room window, still celebrating my sister's mediocrity, and I realized something had fundamentally shifted in me. They had no idea what was coming. I'm Rachel Ashford, 22 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the family disappointment, despite doing everything right. My phone buzzed again with congratulatory emails from Harvard, but all I could think about was my mother's face when she'd raised her glass earlier. That pitying smile as she announced to 30 guests that at least I was trying my best, even if I hadn't found my path yet. Meanwhile, my sister Brooklyn had stumbled through high school with a 2.8 GPA, barely graduated, and taken 2 years off to find herself before applying to Riverside Community College. Yet somehow, her acceptance letter had warranted a celebration dinner with our entire extended family, complete with a cake that read, "Our college girl." The worst part? I'd organized the entire party thinking it was actually for my birthday, which happened to fall on the same day Brooklyn received her acceptance. I'd sent the invitations, ordered the catering, picked up the cake that was supposed to say, "Happy 22nd, Rachel." But when I arrived at my parents' house that morning to help set up, my mother had casually mentioned they'd combined celebrations to make it more special. The cake had been changed. The decorations were all Brooklyn-themed. Even the photo slideshow I'd spent hours creating had been replaced with one featuring exclusively my sister's journey. Growing up in Riverside, California, I'd always been the studious one, while Brooklyn was the social butterfly who charmed everyone despite barely maintaining passing grades. I was the quiet daughter with perfect marks who spent Friday nights studying instead of at parties. Our parents, Dennis and Patricia Ashford, owned a successful but modest accounting firm. They valued stability and practicality above all else, which made my academic ambitions seem almost threatening to them. "Law school is so expensive," my father would say whenever I mentioned my plans, "and so competitive. Maybe you should consider something more realistic, like getting your CPA like us." My mother was worse, constantly suggesting I take a gap year or maybe two to mature before making such big decisions. Meanwhile, Brooklyn could announce she wanted to be a professional Instagram influencer, and they'd nod supportively, calling it entrepreneurial thinking. The discrimination started early, in middle school when I won the regional science fair. My parents attended but left immediately after to take Brooklyn to a friend's birthday party. In high school, when I was named valedictorian, my mother spent the entire graduation ceremony texting Brooklyn, who was home claiming she had a headache. When I received my acceptance to UCLA with a partial scholarship, my father's first response was to worry about how we'd afford the remaining tuition, despite having just bought Brooklyn a new car just because. But I pushed through. I worked 3 jobs during college, maintained my 4.0 GPA, volunteered at legal aid clinics, and networked relentlessly. I'd taken the LSAT 6 months ago and scored in the 99th percentile. My applications to top law schools had been meticulous, my personal statement powerful, my recommendations from professors glowing. I'd applied to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, and NYU as reach schools, with several solid backup options. Every evening for the past 3 months, I'd obsessively checked those admissions portals. I'd received acceptances from NYU and Boston University, both with decent financial aid packages. But Harvard had been silent. Yale had waitlisted me. Stanford had rejected me outright. I'd begun to accept that Harvard was probably a rejection too, and that I'd likely end up at NYU, which was still excellent, but not the absolute pinnacle I'd dreamed of. Today was supposed to change the narrative. I'd imagined telling my family about my acceptances over birthday cake, finally proving that I wasn't the hopeless case they'd made me out to be. Instead, I'd been completely overshadowed by Brooklyn's community college acceptance, something she'd only achieved after my parents hired an expensive admissions consultant and essentially had her application written for her. The party had been excruciating. Aunt Michelle kept asking me if I'd figured out what I wanted to do with my life yet, while Uncle Robert made jokes about me becoming a professional student who never joined the real world. My grandmother, who I'd always been close to, seemed to have forgotten it was my birthday entirely, spending the whole evening praising Brooklyn for finally taking her education seriously. The toast had been the breaking point. My mother had stood up, glass raised, and spent 10 minutes talking about Brooklyn's resilience and growth and how proud they were that she was finally ready to pursue her dreams. Then she turned to me, smiled that condescending smile, and said, "And of course, we're here for Rachel too. She's the one we worry about, always pushing herself so hard, always so stressed. We just hope she finds some balance and happiness eventually, even if her path looks different than she planned." The implication was clear. I was the uptight, miserable daughter who needed to lower her expectations and accept a more realistic life path. Meanwhile, Brooklyn was the beloved free spirit who was celebrated for the bare minimum. The guests had nodded sympathetically at me while applauding Brooklyn enthusiastically. I'd excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 15 minutes before slipping out to my car, unable to stomach another second. Now, sitting in my 8-year-old Honda Civic that I'd bought with my own money, I stared at my phone screen. The Harvard portal had updated. My hands shook as I logged in, expecting the rejection I'd mentally prepared for. Instead, I saw, "Congratulations. We are delighted to offer you admission to Harvard Law School." I scrolled down, barely breathing. Full tuition scholarship, additional stipend for living expenses, automatic consideration for the prestigious Ames Moot Court competition, a personal note from the dean commending my exceptional academic record and demonstrated commitment to public interest law. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. Harvard Law, full ride, with one of the most competitive acceptances in the country. This was the moment I'd dreamed of since I was 16 years old, researching law schools in my high school library, while Brooklyn was out failing her driver's test for the 3rd time. But instead of joy, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Through the dining room window, I could see my family still celebrating. Brooklyn was showing everyone her acceptance letter, which my parents had apparently framed. My mother was crying happy tears. My father was on the phone, presumably calling more relatives to share the wonderful news. They had no idea I'd gotten into Harvard. They didn't even know I'd applied. Every time I'd tried to mention my law school applications, they'd changed the subject or made discouraging comments. They'd made it abundantly clear that they didn't believe in my abilities, didn't support my ambitions, and didn't consider my achievements worthy of celebration. I thought about walking back inside and announcing my news, watching their faces change, forcing them to acknowledge that I'd achieved something exponentially more impressive than Brooklyn's community college acceptance. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of my mother's pitying smile during that toast. Maybe it was years of being overlooked and underestimated. Maybe it was the realization that even if I told them, they'd find a way to diminish it, or make it about Brooklyn somehow. Or maybe it was the darker thought forming in my mind. What if I didn't tell them at all? What if I let them continue believing I was the hopeless daughter, while I quietly built the life they didn't think I was capable of? What if I gave them exactly what they'd always given me? Nothing. I started my car and drove away from my parents' house, leaving my own birthday party without saying goodbye. My phone buzzed with texts from my mother. "Where did you go? Come back. We're about to cut the cake." Not my cake, Brooklyn's cake. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the one place I knew I'd find understanding. My mentor, Professor Vivian Sterling's house. She'd been my undergraduate advisor and had written one of my law school recommendations. When I called, she answered immediately, and 20 minutes later, I was sitting in her living room, showing her the Harvard acceptance email. "Rachel, this is extraordinary," she said, her eyes welling up. "Do you understand how significant this is? Harvard Law with a full scholarship is virtually unheard of. You should be celebrating." "I just came from my birthday party," I said flatly. "Except it wasn't really my party. It was for my sister's community college acceptance. My mother gave a toast about how I'm the one they worry about." Professor Sterling's face hardened. She knew my family history. I'd spent many office hours venting about their treatment over the years. "What did they say when you told them about Harvard?" I didn't tell them. The words came out before I'd fully decided, but saying them aloud made something click into place, and I'm not going to. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. "Rachel, they're your family. Surely they deserve to know." "Do they?" I interrupted. "They deserve to know I got into Harvard, but I didn't deserve to have my birthday acknowledged. I deserve to share my achievement, but my sister's community college acceptance deserves a party with 30 guests. When exactly did they earn the right to celebrate my success when they've spent years undermining me?" Professor Sterling was quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I'm going to accept Harvard's offer. I'm going to move to Cambridge, and I'm going to let my family believe whatever they want to believe about me. When they ask what I'm doing, I'll be vague. When they make their little comments about me figuring out my life, I'll let them. And I'll build my career without their knowledge or their input or their conditional support." "That's a form of cutting them off," Professor Sterling observed. "No. Cutting them off would be honest. This is just letting them live with the consequences of their assumptions. They think I'm hopeless? Fine. They can keep thinking that right up until the moment they realize they've lost any right to claim credit for who I become." I spent the next hour at Professor Sterling's house making plans. She helped me respond to Harvard's acceptance, negotiate the scholarship details, and begin researching housing in Cambridge. By the time I left her house, I felt clear-headed and determined. This wasn't about revenge exactly. It was about self-preservation. My family had proven they would never see me clearly, never appreciate my achievements, never give me the support and recognition I deserved. So why should I give them the satisfaction of knowing about my success? When I finally returned home to my small apartment, the one I paid for entirely by myself while Brooklyn lived rent-free in our parents' guest house. I had 17 texts and 5 missed calls. My mother wanted to know where I'd gone. Brooklyn wanted to know if I was jealous of her success. My father wanted to know if I was being dramatic again. I responded to none of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and began the process of accepting Harvard's offer. As I filled out the online forms, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, excited about my future. Not because my family would finally see my worth, but because I was finally free from needing them to. The irony wasn't lost on me. On the day my family celebrated my sister's bare minimum achievement, while dismissing me as their problem child, I'd received an acceptance that proved I was extraordinary, and they'd never given me the chance to tell them. They'd been too busy explaining why I should lower my expectations. Well, I thought, clicking submit on my acceptance. Let's see how they feel about those expectations 3 years from now when I'm a Harvard Law graduate and they're still waiting for me to figure things out. By then, it would be far too late for them to claim any pride in my accomplishments. They'd made their choice about which daughter deserved their support and celebration. Now I was making mine. And it didn't include them. The next morning, I woke up to a group text from my mother in our family chat. Rachel, your behavior last night was unacceptable. You embarrassed us in front of our guests by leaving without explanation. Brooklyn deserves an apology for you ruining her special day. I stared at the message for a full minute. Not, we're sorry we forgot your birthday. Not, we should have acknowledged you too. Just anger that I dared to leave my own birthday party that had been completely hijacked for Brooklyn's community college acceptance. The audacity was almost impressive. Brooklyn had chimed in. Seriously, Rach, way to make everything about you as always. This was my moment, and you couldn't even be happy for me. I deleted the entire thread without responding and blocked the group chat. Then I called Harvard's admissions office and requested an early move-in date. The administrator was accommodating. Apparently, they had summer programs for incoming students who wanted to get acclimated to campus before the fall semester. I could move to Cambridge in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to extract myself from California, from my jobs, from every connection to my family. I spent that first day giving notice at all 3 of my part-time positions. My managers at the law firm where I worked as a paralegal were stunned when I told them I was leaving for personal reasons and relocating to the East Coast. I didn't mention Harvard. I didn't mention law school. I simply said I needed a change and left it at that. My coworker Janet cornered me in the break room that afternoon. Rachel, what's really going on? This seems so sudden. Is everything okay with your family? Everything's perfect, I lied smoothly. They're actually really excited about my sister starting community college. Big celebration last night. Janet knew me well enough to hear what I wasn't saying. She'd been at the firm for 15 years and had often commented on how talented I was, how I should be aiming for top law schools instead of staying local. And what about you? What are your plans? I'm figuring it out, I said, echoing the exact phrase my parents always used about me, taking some time to explore my options. The confusion in her face was almost comical. She'd read my recommendation letter for Harvard. She'd written it. She knew I'd been applying to elite law schools, but I just smiled blandly and changed the subject. Over the next week, I systematically began separating my life from my family's. I opened a new bank account at a different institution and rerouted my direct deposits. I changed my emergency contacts on all official documents. I found a subletter for my apartment through a UCLA Facebook group, a graduate student who was thrilled to take over my lease immediately. My phone continued to blow up with increasingly aggressive texts from my mother. Your silence is childish. We raised you better than this. You need to apologize to your sister. I responded once, 4 days after the party. I'm sorry I left early. I had something important to handle. Congratulations again to Brooklyn. The apology was strategic. It would stop their harassment without giving them any real information. It worked. My mother responded, "Thank you. We're glad you've come to your senses. Family dinner this Sunday. Don't be late." I didn't go. When she called Sunday evening, furious that I'd stood them up, I told her I'd gotten food poisoning and had been in bed all day. Another lie. Smooth and effortless. The truth was I'd spent the day apartment hunting in Cambridge via video tours, eventually securing a small studio near Harvard Law School. The lying came surprisingly naturally. Years of being gaslit by my own family had apparently taught me how to gaslight them right back. When my father called to lecture me about responsibility and respecting your mother, I listened quietly and agreed with everything he said. Yes, I'd been irresponsible. Yes, I needed to be more considerate. Yes, I understood family came first. I understood perfectly, in fact. Family came first when it was convenient for them, when it was Brooklyn's achievements being celebrated. But my achievements? Those were threatening. Those made them uncomfortable. Those got dismissed or ignored. 2 weeks before my move to Cambridge, I finally saw my family again. My mother had demanded I come to Sunday dinner, and I calculated that refusing would raise too much suspicion. I needed them complacent, not curious about my activities. The dinner was predictably unbearable. Brooklyn held court at the table, talking endlessly about her summer orientation at Riverside Community College. She was planning to major in communications, which as far as I could tell meant she wanted to continue posting on social media, but with a degree to justify it. "The campus is amazing," Brooklyn gushed. "And I already made friends with some girls in my orientation group. We're planning to rush sororities together in the fall." My mother beamed. "That's wonderful, honey. Building your network is so important." Meanwhile, I sat quietly pushing pasta around my plate. My father eventually turned to me. "So, Rachel, have you given any thought to what you're going to do? Your mother and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for you to move back home for a while. Save some money, figure out your next steps." I looked up, forcing my expression to remain neutral. "Actually, I've been doing some thinking." "Oh?" My mother's tone was wary, like she expected me to announce something disastrous. "I've decided to take a break from California, maybe travel a bit, do some soul-searching. I've been so focused on academics for so long, and honestly, I think you were right about needing balance." The shock on their faces was almost worth the degradation of pretending to agree with their terrible advice. My father recovered first. "Well, that's surprisingly mature of you. Where are you thinking of going?" "Maybe the East Coast. I have some friends from UCLA who moved out there. I could couch surf for a while, see if a change of scenery helps me figure things out." Brooklyn snorted. "So basically you're giving up and running away?" "Brooklyn," my mother chided, but I could see she was thinking the same thing. "Rachel, are you sure that's wise? Just leaving without a plan?" "You've always said I need to stop being so rigid about planning everything," I pointed out. "Maybe it's time I embraced some uncertainty." My parents exchanged glances. They wanted to discourage me, but they'd spent years criticizing my type A personality and intense focus on academics. Now that I was apparently giving up and embracing aimlessness, they couldn't exactly object without contradicting themselves. "How will you support yourself?" my father asked. "I have some savings, and I can pick up freelance work, remote stuff. I'll figure it out." I shrugged, channeling every disappointment they'd ever made me feel into this performance of casual defeat. "It's not like I have anything tying me down here anymore." That last part was pointed, but they didn't catch it. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. My mother actually looked relieved. "Well, if you think that's what you need, just promise you'll stay in touch and let us know where you end up." "Of course," I lied. Brooklyn was scrolling on her phone, already bored with the conversation now that it wasn't about her. "When are you leaving?" "Next week, probably. I've already given notice at my jobs and found someone to take over my lease." "Next week?" My mother frowned. "That's very sudden." "Well, you did say I was too rigid about planning," I reminded her sweetly. "I'm trying to be more spontaneous." After dinner, my grandmother cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping with dishes. "Rachel, honey, is everything all right? You seem different." My grandmother was the only one who'd shown me any consistent affection growing up, but even she'd forgotten my birthday. Even she'd spent the entire party fawning over Brooklyn. I measured my words carefully. "I'm fine, Grandma. Just ready for a change." "Are you sure? You've always been so driven. So focused. This doesn't seem like you." "Maybe I'm tired of being that person," I said. "Maybe I want to be more like Brooklyn, just relaxed and going with the flow." She studied my face, and for a moment I thought she might see through the act. But then she just sighed and patted my hand. "Well, if that's what you need. But don't lose yourself completely, dear. Your ambition is part of who you are." "Is it?" I asked, because it seems like the only thing it's ever gotten me is criticism for trying too hard. She didn't have an answer for that. I left my parents' house that evening and drove straight to Target, where I bought luggage and began the practical work of packing up my entire life. My apartment was already mostly boxed up for the subletter, so it was mainly a matter of sorting what I'd take to Cambridge versus what I'd store or donate. The process was oddly therapeutic. Each item I packed felt like a step further from the life my family had mapped out for me, the one where I'd eventually give up on my ambitions, settle for something realistic, and probably end up working at my parents' accounting firm, grateful they'd thrown me a bone. Instead, I was packing for Harvard Law School, full scholarship, with my future completely open and entirely mine. On my last day in California, I met Professor Sterling for coffee. She was one of only 3 people who knew about Harvard. The others were my 2 closest friends from UCLA who'd moved to different states after graduation. Everyone else, every family member, every casual acquaintance, thought I was drifting aimlessly across the country without direction. "Are you sure about this approach?" Professor Sterling asked gently. "Complete radio silence seems extreme." "It's not complete silence," I corrected. "It's strategic ambiguity. If they ask where I am, I'll tell them. If they ask what I'm doing, I'll be vague. But I'm not volunteering information to people who've made it clear they don't value my achievements. And when they eventually find out, then they'll have to live with the fact that they didn't know because they never bothered to ask the right questions or listen to the real answers." I sipped my coffee. My mother gave a toast at my birthday party about how I'm the daughter she worries about. She gets to keep worrying. That's her choice. Professor Sterling looked sad but didn't argue. Promise me you'll stay in touch. I want to hear how you're doing at Harvard, even if your family doesn't get to. I promise. And I meant it. She'd been more supportive in 4 years than my parents had been in 22. The flight to Boston was surreal. I sat in my economy seat wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, looking like any other aimless 20-something traveling with unclear purpose. My carry-on contained my laptop with Harvard acceptance letter, screenshotted in a password-protected folder, and the welcome packet from the law school hidden inside a mundane folder. When I landed at Logan Airport, I took the T to Cambridge and found myself standing outside Harvard Law School's campus. The red brick buildings looked exactly like they did in photos. Imposing and prestigious and utterly terrifying. This was real. I was actually here. My studio apartment was tiny but perfect. A 4th-floor walk-up in a building full of other graduate students. My neighbors were friendly but not intrusive. Exactly what I needed. I spent my first week in Cambridge getting oriented, locating the law school buildings, finding the best coffee shops, memorizing public transit routes. I also started building my new social media presence. I posted vague photos of Boston, the harbor, random street scenes, coffee shops, with captions like "New City, New Perspective," and "Taking time to figure things out." My family occasionally liked these posts but never commented or asked questions. Brooklyn's social media, meanwhile, was an explosion of community college content. Her orientation schedule, her new friends, her sorority rush plans. My mother commented on every single one of Brooklyn's posts. "So proud of you. Our college girl, living your best life." My posts got nothing from them. Radio silence, which told me everything I needed to know about how they viewed my aimless wandering versus Brooklyn's educational journey. Harvard Law School's summer program began in late June. I walked into that first session, an intensive legal writing workshop, wearing my carefully cultivated anonymity like armor. No one here knew I was the family disappointment. No one knew I was supposed to be hopeless and lost. Here, I was just Rachel Ashford, full scholarship student with a 4.0 GPA and a near-perfect LSAT score. Here, my achievements spoke for themselves. The professor leading the workshop was impressed with my writing samples. "You have a natural analytical ability," she told me after the first session. "Have you considered specializing in appellate law?" "I've thought about it," I said carefully, not mentioning that I'd been researching appellate specializations since my sophomore year of college. By the end of the summer program, I'd made friends with several other incoming students. We formed study groups, went out for drinks, explored Boston together. They came from all over the country, all different backgrounds. But we shared one crucial thing. We'd all worked incredibly hard to get here. One evening, over pizza in Harvard Square, my new friend Marcus asked about my family. "Do they know you're at Harvard?" "They know I'm on the East Coast," I said carefully, "but I haven't exactly detailed my academic plans." "Why not?" another friend, Jennifer, asked. "Harvard Law is huge. Most families would be celebrating. Most families aren't mine." I changed the subject, but later that night, Marcus cornered me. "Look, I don't want to pry, but there's a story there, right? You're being deliberately evasive about your family." I considered lying, but something about Marcus's genuine concern made me pause. My younger sister got into community college. My parents threw her a party with 30 guests. I got into Harvard Law with a full ride. They don't know because the party was also my birthday, which they forgot about entirely. Marcus's jaw dropped. "You're kidding." "I'm really not. And honestly, I'm good with them not knowing. They spent my entire life making me feel like my ambitions were too much. Like I should aim lower, be more realistic. So now they get to believe I took their advice. They get to think I'm wandering around Boston without direction while I'm actually here." "That's cold," Marcus said, but he was grinning. "I kind of love it. It's not about revenge," I clarified. "It's about not giving them access to my success when they never supported the work that got me here." As summer turned to fall and the actual first-year law school classes began, I settled into a rigorous routine. The workload was intense. Everything people said about 1L year was true, but I thrived under pressure. I'd spent my entire undergraduate career preparing for exactly this. My family's texts became less frequent. Occasionally, my mother would check in, "How are you doing?" I'd respond with vague pleasantries, "Good. Staying busy." When she asked what I was doing, I'd say, "Exploring the city, meeting people, working on some freelance projects." All technically true, just missing the crucial detail that the freelance projects were law school case briefs and legal memorandums. Brooklyn's social media continued to document her community college experience in exhausting detail. She'd joined a sorority and posted constantly about parties, football games, and sisters. My mother commented on every post with embarrassing enthusiasm. Meanwhile, I was quiet. I posted occasionally, a photo of Boston Common, a shot of my coffee cup in a generic coffee shop, a sunset over the Charles River. Nothing identifying, nothing specific. Just enough to show I was alive and seemingly adrift. 3 months into my first semester, I ran into someone from my UCLA days at a conference in Boston. Emily had been in several of my undergraduate classes and had always been friendly. She spotted me in the conference hallway. "Rachel, oh my God, what are you doing here?" I could ask you the same thing. I deflected. I'm at Boston College Law, she said excitedly. First year. It's intense, but amazing. Are you in law school too? There was no point lying to her. Harvard, I admitted quietly. Her eyes widened. Harvard? Rachel, that's incredible. Why didn't you? Does your family know? It's complicated, I said. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention seeing me if you happen to run into anyone from back home. Emily looked confused, but agreed. We exchanged contact information and promised to meet up for coffee, but I could tell she was puzzled by my request for discretion. That night, I logged into my family's social media accounts, not to interact, but to observe. Brooklyn had posted about making Dean's List at community college with a 3.2 GPA. My mother's comment, so incredibly proud. Our smart girl. I'd maintained a 4.0 through my first semester of Harvard Law School, one of only 15 students in my section to do so. My mother didn't care to know, had never even asked what I was actually doing in Boston beyond the vague figuring things out I'd told her. The disconnect was almost laughable. Brooklyn was being praised for achieving what was essentially mediocrity, while I was excelling at one of the most challenging academic programs in the world in complete anonymity. But the anonymity was my choice, my power, my revenge. They'd made me feel invisible my entire life. Now I was making my success invisible to them, not because I was ashamed, but because they'd lost the privilege of knowing who I really was. Christmas approached, and with it came the inevitable question, would I come home for the holidays? My mother called instead of texting, which meant she was serious. Rachel, we need to know your plans. Are you coming home for Christmas? I'm not sure yet, I hedged. It's expensive to fly, and I'm pretty settled here. Settled? Doing what exactly? There was an edge to her voice. You've been gone for 6 months, and you still haven't told us what your actual plan is? I'm working on some things, I said vaguely. Taking some classes, doing freelance consulting work. It's all coming together. Classes? What kind of classes? Just some professional development stuff. Nothing major. The lies came so easily now. Well, your father and I think you need to come home and have a serious conversation about your future. Wandering is fine for a few months, but you need to start thinking about your career. You're 22 years old. I am thinking about my career, I said truthfully. More than you know. Then come home and tell us about it. Brooklyn will be home from school, and we can all have a family conversation. The idea of flying across the country to sit through another dinner where Brooklyn's community college achievements were praised while I was lectured about being more realistic made me physically ill. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. If you want us to help pay for your flight, we need advance notice. I can pay for my own flight, I said sharply. I've always paid for my own things. She ignored the barb. Just let us know by next week. I didn't go home for Christmas. I told them the freelance projects I was working on had deadlines I couldn't miss. Another half-truth. I did have deadlines. Final exams and a major research paper for my constitutional law class. Instead, I spent Christmas in Cambridge with Marcus and Jennifer, who also hadn't gone home for various reasons. We cooked dinner together in Marcus's apartment, studied, and watched bad movies. It was the best Christmas I'd had in years, free from the constant weight of familial disappointment. My mother sent a passive-aggressive text on Christmas morning. Merry Christmas. Your sister misses you. Family is supposed to be together during the holidays, but I suppose your projects are more important. I didn't respond until that evening. Merry Christmas to you too. Give Brooklyn my love. Short, polite, revealing nothing. As my first year of law school continued, something shifted in me. The anger that had initially fueled my secrecy transformed into something else, genuine indifference. I stopped checking my family's social media obsessively. I stopped crafting my vague posts with them in mind. I simply moved on. I was building a life they knew nothing about, and increasingly, I realized I didn't need them to know. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about finally, fully separating my self-worth from their approval. When I made law review in the spring, a prestigious position that only about 10% of Harvard law students achieved, I celebrated with my friends. We went out for expensive cocktails, and I posted a photo of us toasting. Caption, celebrating good news with good people. My mother liked the post but didn't ask what the good news was. Brooklyn didn't interact at all. My father never looked at social media. They had no idea that their hopeless daughter had just achieved something thousands of law students would kill for. And honestly, I preferred it that way. The spring of my 1L year brought an unexpected complication. My Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister, moved to Boston. She'd accepted a position at Mass General Hospital and called to let me know she'd be in the area. Unlike my parents, Caroline had always been supportive, though we'd never been particularly close due to geographic distance. Your mom mentioned you were wandering around the East Coast, Caroline said when she called. I'd love to take you to dinner once I'm settled. Maybe in April? I couldn't refuse without raising suspicion, so I agreed. When we met at a restaurant in Back Bay, I'd carefully selected my outfit. Nice but not too professional. Expensive enough to suggest I was doing okay, but not so polished that I looked like a law student. Caroline was sharp-eyed, though. Within minutes of sitting down, she was asking pointed questions. So what exactly are you doing out here? Your mother's story keeps changing. First you were traveling, then taking classes. then doing freelance work. All of the above, I said lightly. I'm taking some time to explore different options before committing to a career path. Rachel, she set down her wine glass. I've known you since you were born. You had a career path planned by age 12. What's really going on? I considered my options. Caroline was perceptive enough that complete evasion might backfire. But she was also not my mother. She'd never participated in the favoritism toward Brooklyn. Had actually commented to me once at a family gathering that my parents were a bit blind when it came to comparing their daughters. Can I trust you to keep something confidential? I asked. Depends on what it is. Fair enough. I took a breath. I'm a first-year student at Harvard Law School. Full scholarship. I made law review last month. Caroline's fork clattered against her plate. You're what? Harvard Law? Rachel? That's extraordinary. Why in the world wouldn't you tell your family? Because they don't deserve to know. The words came out harder than I intended. Do you remember my birthday last year? She frowned. Your birthday? Exactly. Nobody remembers. It was the same day Brooklyn got accepted to Riverside Community College. My parents threw a huge party, supposedly for my birthday, but it was really all about Brooklyn. They changed my birthday cake. They made a slideshow about her, and my mother gave a toast about how I'm the one they worry about, while Brooklyn got 10 minutes of praise for getting into community college with a 2.8 GPA. Caroline's face went through several expressions: confusion, realization, anger. Oh, Rachel, I got the Harvard acceptance that same night, while crying in my car after leaving the party early, and I realized they'd never been supportive of my actual achievements, only disappointed I wasn't more like Brooklyn. So I decided they could keep their disappointment. They don't get to know about Harvard. They don't get to suddenly be proud once I've done all the work without their support. But Rachel, they're your parents, who forgot my birthday, who have spent my entire life making me feel like my ambitions were too much, who threw a party for Brooklyn's community college acceptance with 30 guests, but couldn't manage to acknowledge my UCLA graduation, except to worry about the cost of potential graduate school. I leaned forward. Aunt Caroline, I'm happier now than I've ever been. I have friends who value me, professors who respect my work, a future I'm building entirely on my own terms. My family spent 22 years making it clear I wasn't worth celebrating unless I lowered my expectations. I'm just giving them what they wanted. A daughter with low expectations, who they don't have to think about too hard. Caroline was quiet for a long moment. Does anyone in the family know? Just you now. And I'm trusting you not to tell them. Not yet. When will you tell them? Maybe never. Maybe when I graduate. Maybe when it's too late for them to take any credit or feel any pride. I haven't decided. I paused. Does that make me terrible? No, Caroline said slowly. It makes you hurt. And protecting yourself from people who've hurt you, even family, isn't terrible. It's survival. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Rachel. Harvard Law Review. That's phenomenal. Hearing those words from someone with my last name made something crack in my chest. I blinked back unexpected tears. Thank you. I won't tell your parents, she promised, but I reserve the right to brag about you to my own friends. I laughed, despite myself. Deal. Caroline became an unexpected ally. She was the only family member who knew the truth, and she never pushed me to reveal it to the others. When my mother would call her asking about me, Caroline would give vague responses. She seems fine. She's settling into Boston. She's got some projects she's working on, all technically true. Meanwhile, my second year of law school began with even more intensity than the first. As a law review editor, I had additional responsibilities on top of my regular course load. I'd also secured a spot in Professor Harmon's Advanced Constitutional Law Seminar, which was notoriously difficult to get into, and even harder to excel in. Professor Harmon was a former Supreme Court clerk and an intimidating presence. He was known for his Socratic method that reduced students to tears, and his papers that could make or break legal careers. On the first day of seminar, he looked around at the 15 students who'd made it into his class. Most of you will not succeed in my seminar, he said bluntly. Those who do will find doors open that you didn't know existed. Your work will be published in top law journals. You'll clerk for circuit courts, maybe even the Supreme Court. But the price is everything. Every ounce of intellectual rigor you possess. I thrived under that pressure. My first paper for his seminar argued a novel interpretation of the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause as it related to digital privacy. Professor Harmon's feedback was brutal but encouraging. Flawed in execution but brilliant in conception. Revise and resubmit. I revised and revised again, and finally submitted a version that he deemed publishable with minor edits. The paper went on to be published in the Harvard Law Review that spring, with my name in print for the first time as a legal scholar. The day it was published, I held the physical copy in my hands and felt overwhelming pride. This was mine. This achievement existed independent of my family's opinion or awareness. I'd done this. I posted a photo of the law review on social media. Nothing too specific, just the cover with caption, "Hard work, paying off." My mother liked it but didn't comment. Brooklyn didn't interact. They had no idea they were looking at an article I'd written, my name in the contributors list. Marcus saw the post and texted, "You're evil and I love it," but my family's ignorance was starting to create logistical complications. Summer after my second year, I had a prestigious internship lined up at the ACLU's national office in New York. The position was highly competitive and would look incredible on my resume, but it also meant I'd be in New York, not Boston, and I'd need to explain the move. I called my mother before the move. "I'm going to be in New York for the summer. I got a consulting position there." "Consulting?" She sounded suspicious. "What kind of consulting?" "Legal consulting, administrative work, research, that kind of thing." "So you're still not pursuing anything permanent?" "Rachel, you've been exploring for over a year now. Don't you think it's time to commit to something?" "I am committed," I said truthfully. "I'm just building my skills before jumping into a full-time career." She sighed dramatically. "Well, I suppose that's something." Brooklyn just got an internship at a marketing firm in Los Angeles, by the way. Paid position. "She's doing very well." "That's great," I said, neutrally. Brooklyn's marketing firm internship was, according to Caroline, who'd looked it up, an unpaid social media position at a friend's father's small business. But my mother was presenting it as a major career development. The ACLU internship was transformative. I worked on voting rights cases, religious freedom litigation, and LGBTQ+ discrimination suits. The attorneys I worked with were some of the sharpest legal minds in the country, and they treated me like a colleague rather than a student. My supervising attorney, Diane, pulled me aside halfway through the summer. "We don't usually do this with summer interns," she said, "but we'd like to offer you a full-time position after graduation. We're that impressed with your work." "After graduation," I repeated carefully, "as in after law school?" "Yes, you're graduating next year, right? We'd want you to clerk first. I'm assuming you're planning to clerk given your credentials. But then we'd like you to join us as a staff attorney." This was massive. ACLU staff attorney positions were incredibly competitive, the kind of job that defined careers. "I'm honored. Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Rachel, I want you to know, you're exceptionally talented. Whatever you decide to do with your career, you're going to be successful." I walked out of that meeting and immediately called Caroline. "I just got offered a full-time position at the ACLU after graduation." "Rachel, that's amazing. Oh my God, you have to tell your parents now. This is too big to keep quiet." "Why?" I asked genuinely. Why do they deserve to know when they've never asked? When they've never been curious enough about what I'm actually doing to push past my vague answers? Because they're your family. That's not a good enough reason anymore. Caroline was quiet. Then, "You're right, it's not. But eventually they will find out. You know that, right? And when they do, the fallout is going to be spectacular. I'm counting on it," I said. My third and final year of law school was a victory lap. I'd secured a federal clerkship for after graduation, a position with a Ninth Circuit judge that would begin after I took the bar exam. I was still on law review, now as an editor. I was taking advanced seminars and already networking for positions after my clerkship ended. Brooklyn, meanwhile, had graduated from community college with an associate's degree in communications, and was working part-time at a boutique in Los Angeles while living at home. According to Caroline, who kept me updated, my parents were concerned about Brooklyn's lack of career ambition, but trying to be supportive. The irony was almost painful. They'd spent years worrying about me while celebrating Brooklyn's mediocrity. Now Brooklyn was floundering while I was succeeding beyond anything they'd imagined possible, and they had no idea. In November of my 3L year, I got the call I'd been waiting for. I'd been selected for the Ames Moot Court Competition Finals. This was one of the most prestigious accomplishments in law school. Hundreds of students competed. Only a handful made it to the final round. The competition would be held in the spring, with oral arguments judged by sitting federal judges and recorded for posterity. This was exactly the kind of achievement that would be publicized. Harvard Law School would put out press releases. My name would be in legal publications. There would be photos, videos, permanent records of my success. It was time to tell my family. Not because I wanted their approval or pride, but because I wanted to control the narrative when they inevitably found out. I wanted to see their faces when they realized everything they'd missed. I flew home to California for Christmas, the first time I'd been back since moving to Boston 2.5 years earlier. My mother cried when she saw me at the airport, which I found absurd, given that she'd barely stayed in touch. "You look so different," she said, studying my face. "More mature." "It's been 2.5 years, Mom." The house looked exactly the same. Brooklyn was there, scrolling on her phone, barely looking up when I walked in. "Hey, Rach, still figuring things out?" "Something like that," I said. Dinner that night was predictably awkward. My father asked about my consulting work in increasingly skeptical tones. My mother kept pushing me about my long-term plans. Brooklyn talked about the boutique where she worked as if it were a major corporation. Finally, after Brooklyn finished a 10-minute story about a customer complaint she'd successfully handled, I set down my fork. "I actually have some news," I said. Everyone looked at me. My mother's face was already arranged in an expression of gentle disappointment, like she was preparing for me to announce I'd decided to keep wandering for another year. "I'm graduating in the spring," I said. My father frowned. "Graduating? From what? Harvard Law School. The silence was absolute. Brooklyn's phone clattered onto the table. My mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. My father's face went completely blank. Harvard? My mother finally said. Harvard Law School. You're telling us you've been at Harvard Law School for how long? Since a few weeks after my birthday party. The one where you forgot it was my birthday and turned it into Brooklyn's community college celebration. I kept my voice level. Almost pleasant. I got my acceptance letter the night of that party. Full scholarship. While I was sitting in my car crying because you'd given a toast about how I was the daughter you worried about. Rachel, my father started, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished. I've been at Harvard Law for 2.5 years. I made Law Review my first year. I've been published in the Harvard Law Review. I had an internship at the ACLU this summer, where I was offered a full-time position after graduation. I've secured a federal clerkship with the Ninth Circuit. And in the spring, I'm competing in the Ames Moot Court Competition Finals, which will be attended by sitting federal judges and covered by legal media. Brooklyn's face had gone pale. You've been at Harvard this whole time? The whole time you thought I was aimlessly wandering around the East Coast? Yes. My mother's shock was transforming into something else. Anger. You deliberately lied to us. You let us think. Why would you do that? Because you never cared enough to ask the right questions. Because every time I tried to tell you about my achievements, you changed the subject or made discouraging comments. Because you spent my entire life making it clear that Brooklyn's mediocrity was worth celebrating while my success was threatening. That's not fair, my father said, his voice hard. We've always supported you. Really? I pulled out my phone and opened my photos. Here's the invitation I sent for what I thought was my birthday party. Here's the email where Mom told me she'd combined celebrations without asking me. Here's the group text where Brooklyn demanded an apology from me for ruining her special day when I left my own birthday party early. Here's the toast where Mom called me the one we worry about in front of 30 guests. I placed the phone on the table. Show me the support. You're being incredibly unfair, my mother said, but her voice shook. We didn't know you'd applied to law school. You never told us. I tried to tell you dozens of times. Every time I mentioned law school applications, you told me it was too expensive, too competitive, that I should be more realistic. So I stopped telling you. And you never noticed because you were too busy celebrating Brooklyn's every achievement, no matter how minor. Brooklyn finally found her voice. So what, you've been at Harvard this whole time just to prove some point? No, I said firmly. I've been at Harvard building the life I wanted, free from your judgment and your conditional support. I didn't do this to prove a point. I did this because I deserved better than what this family was willing to give me. We're your family, my father said. You owed us the truth. I owed you nothing. You owed me basic respect and recognition. You owed me not forgetting my birthday. You owed me celebrating my achievements the way you celebrated Brooklyn's, but you didn't give me those things. So I stopped giving you access to my life. My mother was crying now. How could you be so cruel? The question was almost funny. Cruel? I was cruel. You forgot my 22nd birthday. You turned my party into Brooklyn's celebration. You gave a toast about how I was your problem child in front of everyone I knew. And I'm the cruel one for not telling you I got into Harvard? You should have told us, my father insisted. We would have been proud. Would you? Or would you have found some way to make it about Brooklyn? Or worried about how my success made you look? Or been uncomfortable that I was aiming too high again? I stood up. I'm going to bed. My flight back to Boston is tomorrow afternoon. We can talk more then if you want, but honestly, I think I've said everything I need to say. I walked out of the dining room, leaving them in shocked silence. As I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, I heard Brooklyn say, I can't believe she went to Harvard and didn't tell us. She's always been difficult, my mother replied, her voice thick with tears. Even now, even with everything laid bare, they were making me the problem. I closed the bedroom door and felt nothing but relief that I'd be back in Boston in less than 24 hours. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My mother, my father, Brooklyn, even my grandmother. Everyone had apparently been informed of the Harvard situation and had opinions. Most of the messages followed a pattern: shock, hurt feelings, accusations of deception, and demands that I come downstairs and talk this through as a family. Not one of them led with an apology or acknowledgement of how they'd treated me. I showered and dressed slowly, in no rush to face them. When I finally came downstairs around 10, I found the entire family assembled in the living room like some kind of intervention. My parents, Brooklyn, my grandmother, and, surprisingly, Aunt Caroline, who caught my eye and gave me a slight nod of solidarity. Rachel, sit down, my father said in his stern accountant voice. We need to talk about this situation. There's no situation, I said, remaining standing. I told you the truth. That's it. You lied to us for nearly 3 years, my mother said, her eyes red from crying. You deliberately deceived your family. Do you have any idea how that feels? Do you have any idea how it feels to be constantly dismissed by your family? To have your achievements overlooked while your sister gets celebrated for the bare minimum? I looked at Brooklyn, who was staring at her lap. I'm not angry at you specifically, Brooklyn. You didn't ask them to treat us differently. But I'm also not going to pretend this family has been equitable in its support. We've always treated you girls the same, my father insisted. Aunt Caroline made a small sound of disagreement. My father's eyes snapped to her. Caroline, if you have something to say, I do, actually. Caroline stood up. I've watched you two parent for years, and Rachel isn't wrong. You've absolutely played favorites. Brooklyn has been praised for accomplishments that would have been considered baseline expectations for Rachel, and Rachel has been criticized for ambitions that should have been encouraged. Stay out of this, my mother said sharply. This is our family. Rachel is my family too, Caroline shot back. And she came to me months ago, told me about Harvard, asked me to keep it confidential. I did because I understood why she felt she couldn't trust you with that information. And honestly, your reactions right now are proving she was right not to tell you. We would have been proud, my grandmother said quietly. Rachel, honey, we would have celebrated with you. Would you? I asked. Because you forgot my 22nd birthday entirely, Grandma. You were there at the party, fawning over Brooklyn's community college acceptance, and you didn't once acknowledge that it was my birthday. That party was supposed to be for me. She looked stricken. I didn't realize. Your mother said it was a combined celebration. It wasn't. It was supposed to be my birthday party. Mom changed it without asking me, and nobody questioned it because Brooklyn's news was more important than my existence. That's not what happened, my mother protested weakly. Then what did happen? I pulled out my phone again. Because I have the emails. I have the texts. I have documentation of every time you dismissed my achievements or discouraged my ambitions. Should I read them aloud? This is ridiculous, Brooklyn suddenly burst out. So you went to Harvard. Congratulations. Do you want a medal for hiding it from everyone? For making us all look stupid? I don't want anything from you, I said calmly. That's the whole point. I stopped needing your approval or recognition. I built my success without you, and I'm fine with that continuing. You can't just cut us out of your life, my father said. We're your family. Watch me. I grabbed my jacket. My flight isn't for several hours, but I'm going to the airport early. I'll get a hotel near LAX if I have to. This conversation is over. Rachel, please. My mother stood up. Can't we want to be proud of you. Let us be proud of you. You don't get to be proud now. You weren't there for the hard work. You didn't support me through the applications, the LSAT, the first year when I was terrified I wasn't good enough. You were too busy celebrating Brooklyn's community college orientation to even ask how I was doing. We didn't know you were in school, my father said. How were we supposed to support something we didn't know about? You could have asked. In 2.5 years, not one of you asked me a direct question about what I was actually doing. You all just assumed I was drifting because that's what you expected from me. The daughter who aimed too high and needed to learn to settle. The truth of this hung in the air. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. She couldn't deny it because it was accurate. Brooklyn was crying now. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry they made everything about me. I didn't ask for that. I know, I said more gently. And I don't blame you for their choices, but I'm also not going to pretend this family dynamic was healthy, or that I owe anyone access to my life now. I called an Uber and waited outside. Through the window, I could see my family arguing. My mother gesticulating wildly. My father looking stern. Brooklyn crying. Caroline standing with her arms crossed. My grandmother sat in her chair, looking old and confused. The Uber arrived, and I got in without looking back. My phone buzzed continuously during the ride to LAX. More texts, more calls, more demands that I come back and fix this. I turned off my phone. At the airport, I bought a day pass to the airline lounge and spent the next 6 hours working on a paper for one of my seminars. When I finally boarded my flight back to Boston, I felt lighter than I had in years. I'd said everything that needed to be said. I'd laid bare the truth. What they did with that information was their problem, not mine. Marcus picked me up at Logan Airport. How bad was it? On a scale of 1 to nuclear meltdown, definitely a solid 8. Did you tell them everything? Everything. Harvard, law review, the ACLU, the clerkship, Ames competition, the whole portfolio of achievements they missed. How'd they take it? Exactly as expected. Hurt feelings that I lied, zero acknowledgement of why I felt I had to, lots of claims that they would have been supportive if only I'd told them. I laughed bitterly. My mom actually said, "We want to be proud of you," as if that's something they can just decide to feel now that they know the truth. That's garbage. Yep, I looked out the window at the Boston skyline coming into view. But you know what? I don't care anymore. I really, genuinely don't care if they're proud or hurt or angry. I've built something here that has nothing to do with them, and that's exactly how I want it. Back in Cambridge, I threw myself into preparation for the Ames competition. The case we'd be arguing involved a complex constitutional question about Fourth Amendment search and seizure in the digital age. I was arguing for the petitioner, and my partner was a brilliant student named James who'd become a close friend over the past year. "Your family drama must be pretty intense right now," James observed during one of our practice sessions. "It's fine. I'm ignoring it." "That's healthy," he said sarcastically. "What do you want me to do?" They're upset I didn't tell them about Harvard. I'm upset they never cared enough to ask what I was really doing. There's no resolution that makes everyone happy. Have they apologized? I checked my phone, which I had finally turned back on. 37 new messages, but scanning through them, not one contained an actual apology. Lots of, "We're hurt? How could you? This isn't fair to us," but zero acknowledgement that their behavior had driven my decision. "Nope," I said, "not a single apology." "Then screw them," James said. "Focus on Ames. That's what matters." He was right. The Ames competition was in late March, and it would be attended by several hundred people, including professors, practicing attorneys, and sitting federal judges. Harvard would publicize it extensively. There would be photos, press releases, social media coverage. My family would find out one way or another. The entire legal community would know. January and February passed in a blur of preparation. I ignored my family's attempts to contact me except for a brief text to my mother. "I need space. Please respect that." She responded with a paragraph about how I was being immature and needed to communicate like an adult. I didn't reply. Caroline texted separately. "They're a mess. Brooklyn is spiraling because she's realizing how much more you've accomplished. Your parents are defensive, but I think they're starting to understand how badly they screwed up. Give them time." "They had 22 years, I replied. "I'm done giving them time." In mid-March, Harvard Law School's communications office reached out about the Ames competition. They wanted to do a feature on the finalists for the law school website and social media. They'd be taking professional photos, conducting interviews, and live streaming the competition itself. "This will be publicly accessible?" I confirmed with the communications director. "Yes, we publicize Ames extensively. It's one of our flagship programs. Why do you ask?" "Just confirming. That's perfect." I did the photo shoot and interview without mentioning my family situation. When asked about my support system, I talked about my professors, my friends, and Aunt Caroline. The interviewer seemed satisfied. The feature went live 1 week before the competition. Professional photos of me in my suit, smiling confidently. An article about my academic achievements. My law review publication. My upcoming clerkship. Quotes from Professor Harmon calling me one of the most talented students I've taught in 20 years. Harvard Law School posted it across all their social media channels. Alumni groups shared it. Legal publications picked it up. Within 24 hours, my accomplishments were circulating throughout the legal community and beyond. My phone exploded. Suddenly, everyone from my past was reaching out. High school teachers I hadn't spoken to in years, distant relatives who'd never shown much interest in me, family friends who'd been at that disastrous birthday party, and of course my immediate family. My mother called 6 times in 1 hour. My father sent a long email about being disappointed that we had to learn about your success from social media. Brooklyn sent a simple text. "Everyone is asking me about you. Thanks for the heads up." I responded to none of them. Instead, I focused on my final preparations for Ames. This was my moment, my achievement, and I wasn't going to let their belated recognition distract from it. The morning of the competition, I dressed in my best suit. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, expensive but not ostentatious, professional but confident. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the daughter who'd sat at that birthday party watching her sister get celebrated for mediocrity. This wasn't the girl who'd cried in her car after being called the daughter her parents worried about. This was Rachel Ashford, Harvard Law Review editor, Ames finalist, future federal clerk. This was the woman I'd become despite my family, not because of them. The competition was held in the historic Ames courtroom at Harvard Law School, a beautiful space that had hosted oral arguments for over a century. The room filled quickly. Professors, students, legal professionals, and yes, several Harvard staff members with cameras ready to document everything. I'd invited Aunt Caroline, Professor Sterling from UCLA, and a few close friends. I hadn't invited my immediate family, but that didn't stop them from showing up anyway. They arrived just minutes before the competition was set to begin. My mother, father, and Brooklyn, all dressed formally, looking completely out of place and desperately uncomfortable. They found seats in the back, and I watched my mother scan the room, taking in the prestige and gravitas of the setting, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what I'd accomplished. I turned away and focused on my notes. They didn't get to be here, not really. They could physically occupy space in this room, but they hadn't earned the right to share in this achievement. The judges were announced, 2 sitting federal appellate judges and a retired Supreme Court justice. The room fell silent as they entered and took their seats at the bench. This was the highest level of legal analysis and advocacy, and I was about to perform in front of some of the most important legal minds in the country. James and I approached the counsel table. Across from us sat our opponents, equally prepared and equally nervous. The chief judge looked at me. "Counsel for the petitioner, you may begin your argument." I stood, took a breath, and began. "May it please the court." The next 45 minutes were some of the most intense of my life. The judges asked brutal questions, probing every weakness in my argument, forcing me to think on my feet and defend positions I'd spent months developing. But I was ready. Every hypothetical, every challenge, every attempt to poke holes in my reasoning. I had answers. James handled the second half of our argument with equal skill. And when we finished, I could see the judges nodding almost imperceptibly. We'd done well, really well. The judges deliberated for only 15 minutes before returning with their decision. Petitioner prevails. We'd won. The room erupted in applause. My professors were beaming. My friends were cheering. Aunt Caroline had tears in her eyes. And in the back of the room, I could see my mother standing, her hands clasped together, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride? Yes, but also something like regret. I didn't care. This moment was mine, and her belated recognition meant nothing. The reception after the Ames competition was held in one of Harvard Law School's elegant faculty rooms. Professors and judges mingled with finalists, discussing the arguments and congratulating us on our performance. I was surrounded by congratulations, with several prominent attorneys expressing interest in discussing career opportunities once my clerkship ended. I saw my family hovering near the refreshment table, clearly out of their element. Brooklyn looked miserable in a dress that was too formal for her usual style. My father kept checking his phone, uncomfortable with not being the center of attention. My mother was watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Professor Harmon approached me with one of the judges. "Rachel, Justice Morrison wanted to meet you. She was particularly impressed with your handling of the standing question." I shook the retired Supreme Court Justice's hand, trying not to visibly tremble. "Thank you, Justice Morrison. That means everything coming from you. Where's your clerkship?" she asked. "Ninth Circuit, Judge Anderson's chambers." "Excellent, Judge. You'll learn a tremendous amount." She leaned in slightly. "Have you thought about Supreme Court clerkships? I still have connections, and with your credentials." My heart nearly stopped. Supreme Court clerkships were the pinnacle, the achievement that guaranteed your place in legal history. I'd be honored to be considered. "Send me your materials through Professor Harmon. I can't make promises, but I can make introductions." She smiled warmly and moved on to speak with other students. I turned to find my mother standing directly behind me, tears streaming down her face. "Rachel, I need to talk to you. This really isn't the time or place. Please, just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I followed her into a quiet corner of the reception room. My father and Brooklyn joined us, forming a tight, uncomfortable circle. "That was incredible," my mother started. "Watching you up there, arguing in front of those judges, I had no idea you were capable of something like that." The words landed exactly wrong. Not, "I'm proud of you," but "I had no idea you were capable." As if my success was surprising rather than the natural result of years of hard work they'd never bothered to witness. "Why are you here?" I asked bluntly. "I didn't invite you. We're your family," my father said. "When we saw the Harvard Law School post about the competition, we knew we had to come support you." "Support me now?" I laughed without humor. Where was this support when I was applying to law school? When I was drowning under 1L workload? When I made law review? You don't get to show up for the final performance and claim you supported the entire production. "We didn't know," my mother insisted. "If you'd told us, I tried to tell you. Repeatedly, and you shut me down every single time." I could see other people glancing our way, sensing the tension. "You know what the worst part is? You're not even apologizing. You're here trying to get credit for something you had no part in." Brooklyn spoke up for the first time. "Rachel, I get that you're angry, but Mom and Dad really didn't know. How were they supposed to support something they didn't know about? By paying attention, by asking questions, by caring enough to look past my vague answers and wonder what I was actually doing with my life." I looked at each of them. "You came all the way to Boston to watch me compete, which is more effort than you ever made when I actually lived in California. Do you see the problem with that? We want to make things right," my father said. "Tell us how to fix this." "You can't fix this. That's what you don't understand. You can't retroactively support me. You can't go back and celebrate my achievements the way you celebrated Brooklyn's. You can't undo years of favoritism and dismissal with one trip to watch me compete." "So what? You're just going to cut us out forever?" Brooklyn asked. "Punish us indefinitely?" "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself from people who have proven they don't value me unless I achieve something so undeniable that even you can't dismiss it. But here's the thing. I don't need your validation anymore. I have professors who believe in me, friends who support me, a career path that's opening up in ways I never imagined. You taught me that I had to succeed without you, and I did. That lesson doesn't just go away because you finally noticed." My mother grabbed my hand. "Rachel, please. We made mistakes. Can't we move forward?" "Forward to what? You want to be proud of me now? Great. Be proud. But that doesn't mean I have to let you back into my life. It doesn't mean I have to share my future achievements with people who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge the past ones." "This is cruel," my father said, his voice hardening. "We came all this way. You came because Harvard Law School's social media made it impossible to ignore me. You came because other people saw what I accomplished, and you were embarrassed that you didn't know. You didn't come for me. You came for yourselves, to save face." The truth of this settled over them. My mother's tears intensified. Brooklyn looked away. My father's jaw tightened in that way it did when he knew he was wrong, but couldn't admit it. "I need to get back to the reception," I said. "My professors and the judges are waiting. You're welcome to stay if you want, but don't expect me to play happy family for the cameras." I walked away, leaving them standing in their uncomfortable circle. Aunt Caroline intercepted me at the edge of the crowd. That looked intense. They want forgiveness without accountability. That's usually how family dynamics work, she said. They expect you to absolve them because you're related. Well, I'm not absolving them. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. They made their choices. Now they live with the consequences. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of professional networking and genuine celebration with people who'd actually supported me. My family left at some point. I didn't notice when. They sent a series of texts later that I glanced at but didn't read fully. The gist seemed to be more injured feelings and demands that I be the bigger person. 3 days after the Ames competition, my phone rang with a Boston area code I didn't recognize. Ms. Ashford, this is Justice Morrison's clerk calling. The justice would like to schedule a call with you about a potential Supreme Court clerkship. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Yes, absolutely. When would be convenient? The call with Justice Morrison happened 2 days later. She explained she was making recommendations for clerkship positions for the next term, and thought I'd be an excellent fit. I'd be recommending you for Justice Chen's chambers. She's looking for clerks with your particular constitutional law background. Justice Chen, I repeated, barely breathing. Justice Chen was one of the most respected members of the court, known for her brilliant opinions on civil rights and constitutional interpretation. I would be honored beyond words. I can't guarantee anything, but I'll put in a strong word. Expect to hear from her chambers within the month. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall. Supreme Court clerk, the absolute pinnacle of legal achievement, the position that would define my entire career. And I'd gotten here completely without my family's help or knowledge. I didn't call them to share the news. I didn't post about it on social media. I told only my closest friends and Aunt Caroline, swearing them to secrecy. You're really not going to tell your parents? Caroline asked. Why would I? So they can take credit? So they can suddenly be the proud parents of a Supreme Court clerk when they couldn't be bothered to support me as a law student? Rachel, at some point you have to decide if you want them in your life or not. I'm not deciding anything. I'm just living my life without them, the way I've been doing for 3 years. They can be in the audience if they want, but they don't get backstage access anymore. May arrived, and with it came law school graduation. Harvard Law School's commencement was a major event, held outdoors in Harvard Yard with thousands of attendees. I'd purchased tickets for only 3 people, Aunt Caroline, Professor Sterling, and Marcus's mother, who'd become a supportive figure during my 3 years in Cambridge. My parents somehow got tickets anyway, probably through alumni connections or by purchasing them from other students. They showed up at graduation looking determined to be part of my day whether I wanted them there or not. The ceremony was long but moving. When they called my name to receive my degree, I walked across that stage feeling nothing but pride in what I'd accomplished. I'd done this, me, nobody else. After the ceremony, there was a reception where graduates milled around taking photos with faculty and family. I was standing with Professor Harmon discussing my upcoming clerkship when my parents approached. Rachel, my mother said, we'd like to take a family photo. Why? She looked taken aback. Because you're graduating from Harvard Law School. That's worth documenting. Is it? Because my UCLA graduation wasn't worth much attention, and my high school graduation was barely acknowledged. What makes this one special? The Harvard name? Don't be like that, my father said. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to claim this achievement. Post photos on Facebook showing what supportive parents you are. Get to tell your friends about your Harvard law grad daughter. But you don't get those things. You weren't there for the work. You don't get credit for the results. We're still your parents, my mother said, her voice breaking. That means something. Does it? Because it didn't mean enough for you to remember my birthday. It didn't mean enough for you to ask what I was actually doing when I moved to Boston. It didn't mean enough for you to celebrate my achievements the way you celebrated Brooklyn's. I looked at both of them. You taught me that being your daughter meant being secondary to Brooklyn, and that's fine. But don't expect me to forget that lesson just because Harvard's name is now attached to mine. Brooklyn appeared, looking uncomfortable in her graduation outfit. She'd driven up with my parents specifically for this event. Can we please just take one photo? Is that really too much to ask? Actually, yes. I turned to Professor Harmon. I'm sorry about this. Don't be, he said, looking at my parents with thinly veiled disapproval. Family dynamics can be complicated. Congratulations again, Rachel. You've earned everything you've achieved. I walked away from my family and spent the rest of the reception with people who'd actually supported me. I took photos with Aunt Caroline, with my professors, with my friends. I posted those photos to social media with captions thanking the people who'd believed in me. Not one photo included my parents or Brooklyn. The message was clear. That evening, my mother sent a long text message that I read once and then deleted. The summary: we're hurt, we're trying, you're being unreasonable. Family should forgive. We're proud of you now. Why can't that be enough? I didn't respond. Instead, I went out to dinner with my real support system and celebrated the end of law school with people who'd earned the right to be there. 2 weeks later, I received the call I'd been waiting for. Justice Chen's chambers wanted to interview me for a clerkship position. The interview was scheduled for the following week in Washington, D.C. I flew to D.C., interviewed with Justice Chen and her existing clerks, and walked out feeling like I'd just had the most intellectually stimulating conversation of my life. Justice Chen was brilliant, thoughtful, and clearly interested in my constitutional law background. You'd be working on some of the most important cases in the country, she told me. First Amendment issues, Fourth Amendment questions, equal protection challenges. The work is intense, but meaningful. That's exactly what I want, I said honestly. 3 days after the interview, I received the offer. Supreme Court clerkship, Justice Chen's chambers. Starting after my Ninth Circuit clerkship ended, I sat in my apartment holding the offer letter and let myself cry. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming achievement. I'd done it. I'd achieved something so rare, so prestigious, that fewer than 40 people in the country would get this opportunity each year. And I'd gotten here entirely on my own merit, without my family's support or knowledge or interference. I told Aunt Caroline first, then Professor Harmon, who was genuinely emotional when I shared the news, then my close friends, who reacted with appropriate awe and celebration. I didn't tell my parents, not yet. I wanted to savor this achievement without their belated pride tainting it. The Supreme Court clerkship announcement came out in early June. Justice Chen's chambers released the names of her 4 new clerks, and my name was featured prominently in legal publications. National media covered it. Supreme Court clerks were always newsworthy, especially ones with my background of Harvard Law Review, Ames competition winner, and incoming Ninth Circuit experience. My phone exploded again. Congratulations poured in from every corner of my life, except my family. They didn't congratulate me. Instead, they sent variations of the same message. We had to learn about your Supreme Court clerkship from the news. This is unacceptable. Call us immediately. I didn't call. I was busy preparing for the bar exam, which I took and passed in July with scores high enough to qualify me for any jurisdiction I wanted. When the results came in, I posted a simple photo of my passing score with the caption, Harvard Law graduate, Supreme Court clerk-to-be, now officially licensed to practice law. The comments were overwhelmingly congratulatory. Hundreds of messages from former classmates, professors, colleagues from my ACLU internship, even partners at prestigious law firms I'd networked with over the years. My parents didn't comment. Instead, my mother showed up at my apartment in Cambridge unannounced in mid-August. I opened the door to find her standing there with a suitcase, looking exhausted. Mom, what are you doing here? I flew out to see you. We need to talk, and you won't answer my calls. There's nothing to talk about. Rachel, please, just let me say what I need to say. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on my couch, looking around at my apartment, the small but comfortable space I'd created for myself, filled with law books and case files and photos of my chosen family. This is about Brooklyn, she started, which was not what I expected. She's struggling. She's been depressed since your graduation. She quit her job at the boutique. She's barely leaving her room. And you think that's my fault? I think she finally realized how much more you've accomplished, and it's destroyed her self-esteem. She feels like she can never measure up to you. The irony was staggering. Mom, do you hear yourself? Brooklyn is depressed because she finally understands what I lived with for 22 years, being constantly compared to someone else and found wanting. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing, except Brooklyn was always the favored one. She got celebrated for mediocrity, while I got criticized for excellence. Now she's experiencing a fraction of what I felt my entire childhood, and you're here asking me to, what? Tone down my success so Brooklyn feels better about herself? No, I'm asking you to talk to her, to tell her that she's valuable too. Why is that my job? Why am I responsible for Brooklyn's self-esteem? Where was your concern about my self-esteem when you forgot my birthday and called me the daughter you worry about in front of everyone I knew? My mother started crying. I know we made mistakes. I know we favored Brooklyn. I know we dismissed you, but Rachel, we didn't understand what we were doing. We thought Brooklyn needed more support because she struggled more. We thought you were so capable that you didn't need us. That's not support, that's neglect. And yes, I was capable. But do you have any idea how lonely it was to be capable without acknowledgement? To achieve things that should have made my family proud, but instead made them uncomfortable? I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. The apology I'd waited 3 years to hear felt hollow now. Too late, too little, too conditional. Are you sorry for what you did? Or sorry that I succeeded despite you? Both, she admitted. I'm sorry we hurt you, and I'm sorry we missed out on being part of your success. You didn't miss out. You chose not to participate. Every time I tried to share my ambitions, you shut me down. Every time I achieved something, you changed the subject to Brooklyn. You made active choices, repeatedly, to dismiss me. That's not missing out. That's opting out. What can I do to fix this? She asked desperately. What do you need from me? Nothing. I don't need anything from you, and that's the problem you can't seem to grasp. You want to fix this now because I've become someone impressive, someone you can brag about. But I needed you when I was nobody impressive. When I was just your daughter trying to make you proud. You weren't there then, so I don't need you now. She sobbed harder. So there's no forgiveness? No path forward? I didn't say that. But if there's going to be a relationship between us going forward, it needs to be on my terms. Not yours. Not family obligation. Mine. What are your terms? I'd thought about this, actually. First, you acknowledge, publicly, to the family, how you treated me versus Brooklyn, not just admitting mistakes, but specifically naming what you did. Second, you work on yourself. Therapy, self-reflection, whatever it takes to understand why you played favorites. Third, you stop expecting me to make Brooklyn feel better about herself. She's an adult. Her self-esteem is her responsibility. And fourth, you understand that rebuilding trust takes years. And there's no guarantee I'll ever feel close to you again. That's very harsh, is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it's generous. You forgot my birthday, turned my party into Brooklyn's, watched me leave crying, and then spent the next 3 years not noticing I was at Harvard Law School. Harsh would be never speaking to you again, which I'm well within my rights to do. My mother sat with this for a long moment. I'll do whatever you need. The therapy, the public acknowledgement, all of it. We'll see, I said, unconvinced. She stayed in Boston for 2 more days, during which I maintained careful distance. We had one dinner together where she attempted small talk about my upcoming clerkship. I gave minimal responses, unwilling to share the excitement and anticipation I felt with someone who'd only recently decided I was worth knowing. When she left, she hugged me at the airport. I stood stiffly in her arms, unable to return the embrace with any genuine feeling. I love you, Rachel. I know you do, I said. I'm just not sure that's enough anymore. My Ninth Circuit clerkship began in September. I moved to San Francisco and threw myself into the work. Judge Anderson was brilliant and demanding, exactly the mentor I needed. The cases were fascinating, complex constitutional questions, cutting-edge technology law, civil rights issues that would shape policy for decades. I excelled, as I knew I would. Judge Anderson frequently praised my research and writing, and by 6 months into my clerkship, she was trusting me with increasingly significant responsibilities. My personal life also flourished. I'd started dating Marcus seriously. He'd ended up in San Francisco as well for a corporate law position, and what had been a close friendship evolved into something more. He understood my family dynamics because he'd witnessed them firsthand during law school. He never pushed me to reconcile or forgive before I was ready. My family made gestures. My mother started therapy and occasionally sent me updates on her progress. My father wrote me a long letter acknowledging his favoritism toward Brooklyn and apologizing for dismissing my ambitions. Brooklyn sent sporadic texts that were tentative attempts at sisterly connection. I responded to these gestures politely, but without warmth. Yes, they were making efforts, but efforts didn't erase 22 years of being second best in their eyes. In November, my mother asked if I'd come home for Thanksgiving. The whole family will be there. It would mean a lot to have you. I'm not ready for that, I said honestly. I have plans with friends. Rachel, at some point you need to forgive us. No, I don't. I need to decide if I want a relationship with you going forward, but I don't need to forgive you. Those are different things. Christmas came with the same request and the same response. I spent the holidays in San Francisco with Marcus and other transplanted friends, creating new traditions that had nothing to do with my family of origin. My Supreme Court clerkship began in July, and I moved to D.C. with a mixture of excitement and terror. Working for Justice Chen was intellectually stimulating beyond anything I'd experienced. The cases were monumental, the analysis required was sophisticated, and the impact of our work would shape constitutional law for generations. I worked alongside 3 other clerks who were equally brilliant, and we formed a tight-knit team. Justice Chen was a demanding but fair boss, pushing us to think more deeply and write more clearly than we thought possible. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. My parents came to D.C. in September, ostensibly to see the monuments, but really to see me. I met them for one dinner at a restaurant near the Capitol. They'd clearly rehearsed their talking points. We've been in therapy, both individual and marriage counseling, my father said. We're working on understanding our patterns. That's good, I said neutrally. We talked to Brooklyn about how our favoritism affected both of you, my mother added. She's in therapy now too. She's working on building her own life separate from our expectations. Also good. Rachel, we can't undo the past, my father said, but we're trying to be better. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for something, I acknowledged, but it doesn't automatically restore our relationship. You're doing the work you should have done 25 years ago. I'm glad you're doing it, but that doesn't mean I'm obligated to welcome you back into my life with open arms. What would it take? My mother asked. What do we need to do to prove we've changed? Time, I said simply. Consistency. Years of better behavior. And accepting that, even with all that, I might never feel close to you again. Some damage can't be fully repaired. They looked devastated, which I noted with a certain cold satisfaction. For once, they were experiencing a fraction of the pain they'd caused me. After dinner, I returned to my apartment near Capitol Hill and video called Marcus. How'd it go? They're trying, I admitted. Actually trying. With therapy and acknowledgments and all the things I asked for. And it doesn't change how I feel. Maybe it will eventually. Maybe years from now, I'll be able to have some kind of relationship with them. But right now, all I feel when I'm with them is the absence of what should have been there all along. That's fair, Marcus said. You're allowed to feel however you feel. My year at the Supreme Court was transformative. I worked on cases that made national news, drafted portions of opinions that would be studied for decades, and developed relationships with some of the most influential legal minds in the country. Justice Chen was impressed enough with my work that she wrote recommendations that essentially guaranteed me any position I wanted after my clerkship. I had offers from elite law firms, top-tier government positions, and prestigious public interest organizations. I ultimately chose to join a boutique appellate firm that specialized in constitutional litigation, small enough to give me significant responsibility, but reputable enough to keep building my career. My family wanted to celebrate my clerkship ending and new position beginning. They wanted to throw a party, to make up for the ones we should have thrown before. I declined. I didn't want their celebration now. Their pride felt performative. Something they did because I'd achieved things they could brag about, not because they genuinely valued who I was. Instead, I celebrated with the people who'd actually been there. Aunt Caroline, Professor Sterling, Marcus, my law school friends, my co-clerks, and Judge Anderson and Justice Chen, who both attended a small dinner I organized. At that dinner, Justice Chen pulled me aside. Your family situation is none of my business, but I've noticed they're never mentioned when you talk about your support system. We're not close, I said carefully. That's your choice to make, she said. But Rachel, you've built something extraordinary here. Your career, your relationships, your entire life. It's impressive not just professionally, but personally. Don't let your family's past behavior define your future. Whether you reconcile with them or not, make sure it's your decision, not a reaction to their neglect. Her words stayed with me. Was I avoiding my family out of genuine disinterest in reconnection? Or was I punishing them? Maybe both, and maybe that was okay. That summer, 3 years after I'd first told them about Harvard, my mother called with unexpected news. Brooklyn is getting married. She met someone at her new job and they're engaged. She wants you at the wedding. When is it? Next June. Rachel, please come. This would mean a lot to her. To all of us. I thought about it for a week before responding. I'll come to the wedding on 2 conditions. First, I'm not in the bridal party. I'll attend as a guest, nothing more. Second, you all stop pushing for some grand reconciliation. I'm there for Brooklyn's milestone, not to perform family unity. Done. My mother agreed immediately. Brooklyn's wedding was in Riverside, California, at a vineyard my parents had partially paid for despite their previous concerns about finances. It was clear they'd spared no expense for their favored daughter's big day. I flew in the morning of the wedding with Marcus as my date. The ceremony was lovely. Brooklyn looked genuinely happy, and her fiancé seemed like a decent person. I felt nothing but mild happiness for her, the kind you'd feel for any acquaintance experiencing a positive life event. At the reception, my extended family descended on me with questions about the Supreme Court, my current firm, my future plans. My mother kept trying to inject herself into these conversations, to stand next to me as if she'd been part of my journey all along. I kept physically moving away, creating distance. Brooklyn approached me during dinner. Thank you for coming. I know things are weird between you and Mom and Dad. It's your wedding. I wanted to be here for you. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, for all of it. I didn't understand when we were younger how differently they treated us. I thought it was normal. By the time I realized the pattern was so established. It's not your fault, I said, meaning it. You didn't ask them to favor you. No, but I benefited from it. And I never stood up for you. That was a choice. She looked at me seriously. I'm working on myself now. Therapy, actually building a career instead of coasting. I don't expect us to be close, but I want you to know I see what happened, and I'm sorry for my part in it. It was the most mature conversation we'd ever had. I appreciate that. Mom and Dad really are trying, she added. I know you don't owe them anything, but they've changed. They talk about you all the time now. About how proud they are. They're proud of what I've accomplished. That's not the same as being proud of who I am. Maybe, Brooklyn conceded. But maybe that's a start? I didn't answer. We made small talk for a few more minutes before she was pulled away by other guests. Marcus found me after, reading my expression accurately. You okay? Yeah, I said, just thinking about what Justice Chen said, about making sure my choices about my family are actual choices, not reactions. And I think I've been reacting. I've been so focused on denying them access to my success that I haven't thought about whether I want any relationship with them at all. Do you? I don't know yet, but I think I need to stop avoiding the question. 6 months after Brooklyn's wedding, I invited my parents to DC, not for a reconciliation, but for an honest conversation. We met at a neutral restaurant, and I came prepared with years of thoughts I needed to express. I want to be clear about something. I started. This isn't me forgiving everything that happened. This is me acknowledging that you're making efforts and deciding what kind of relationship, if any, I want going forward. They both nodded, looking nervous. You hurt me deeply. You made me feel invisible, unvalued, and secondary for my entire childhood. That damage doesn't just go away because you've spent a few years in therapy, but I also recognize that you're trying to change, and that counts for something. What do you want from us? My father asked. Honestly, I don't know yet. I don't know if I'll ever feel close to you again. I don't know if I can trust you to show up for me consistently, but I think I'm willing to try having some kind of relationship. Distant, boundaried, but present. That's all I can offer right now. We'll take it, my mother said immediately. Whatever you're willing to give, we'll take it. Over the next year, we developed a new normal. They visited DC occasionally, and I went home for major holidays, but never stayed more than a day or two. We had dinners where we discussed my work in general terms, and their lives in equally general terms. It was cordial but not warm, present but not intimate. Brooklyn and I also developed a tentative adult relationship. We'd never be close in the way some sisters were, but we could have pleasant conversations and genuinely celebrate each other's milestones. When she had her first baby, I flew to California to meet my nephew and felt authentic happiness for her. My career continued to flourish. I argued my first case before the Ninth Circuit and won. I published articles in top law journals. I gave lectures at law schools about constitutional litigation. And through it all, I built my life exactly as I wanted it, on my own terms, with my own chosen family, creating success that belonged only to me. Marcus and I got engaged on a trip to Hawaii, in a private moment that we shared only with our closest friends before telling family. When I called my mother to share the news, she cried, happy tears this time. Can I help plan the wedding? She asked tentatively. Let's start with you attending the wedding and see how that goes, I said, not unkindly. 5 years after that disastrous birthday party, I sat in my DC apartment preparing for an oral argument the next day at the Supreme Court, not as a clerk, but as the attorney of record. I'd been invited to argue a major First Amendment case, and Justice Chen would be on the bench. My life looked nothing like my parents had imagined for me. I'd exceeded every expectation and achieved success they couldn't have dreamed of. And I'd done it entirely without them, proving to myself that I never needed their approval to become who I was meant to be. Marcus came home from his firm and found me reviewing notes. How are you feeling about tomorrow? Confident, prepared, ready. Your family is coming, right? To watch? My mom and Brooklyn are flying in. Dad's not work stuff. I shrugged. It's fine. Aunt Caroline is coming, and Professor Sterling, and that's what matters. Do you ever regret how things unfolded? The 3 years of secrecy? The distance you've maintained? I thought about it honestly. No, I needed to become who I was without their influence. If I'd told them about Harvard from the start, if I'd let them back in before I was strong enough, they might have found a way to make my success about them. This way, everything I've built is undeniably mine. And now I have the life I always wanted, with or without their participation. If they want to be part of it going forward, they can be on the periphery, where they've earned their place. But my success, my achievements, my pride in myself, none of that requires their validation anymore. The next day, I stood before the Supreme Court and argued my case with confidence and clarity. My family sat in the audience: my mother, Brooklyn, Aunt Caroline, Professor Sterling, Marcus, and several friends and colleagues. Justice Chen asked me the hardest questions, which I answered precisely and thoughtfully. When I walked out of that courtroom, I was surrounded by congratulations and praise. My mother tried to hug me, and I let her, a brief, cordial embrace that acknowledged her presence without granting her pride any real power over me. You were incredible, she said, tears in her eyes. Thank you, I replied simply, because at the end of the day, I knew the truth. I was incredible with or without her recognition. My family had taught me to succeed without them, and that was a lesson I'd never forget, not with anger or bitterness, but with the deep satisfaction of knowing I'd proved to myself, if no one else, exactly what I was capable of becoming. They'd called me hopeless. I'd shown them what hope looked like when it was self-generated, self-sustained, and entirely triumphantly mine.